Who really knows you, and why does deep connection matter? We're going to unpack that today, and I'm joined right now by Dr. Curt Thompson, who is a psychiatrist, author, speaker, and the co-host of the Being Known podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm really excited for this conversation about community and connection. Now, let's just start with what your specialty is, interpersonal neurobiology. So could you just simplify that for us?
Sure. It's a bit of a mouthful, I understand. Interpersonal neurobiology is a general field of study that includes a number of scientific disciplines that all have a stake in two questions. Number one, what is the mind? And number two, what does a mind look like that is flourishing? We have all kinds of data that tell us pretty easily what a mind looks like that is not flourishing well, that is sick, that is unwell. But what does a mind look like that's actually well? And so that is a field of study that's emerged over the last 20 years that has helped us answer that question. And as a psychiatrist, it's been a great joy to be able to apply these scientific principles, especially working with people within a faith community, because it really gets at this notion that God never leaves himself without a witness. God is even using principles that we're discovering in this particular scientific discipline to speak back into how we operate as human beings, and as it turns out, really reflects very deeply what we learn about, read about, and encounter that the biblical narrative tells us that it means for us to be human beings and what it means for us as humans to flourish under the lordship of Jesus.
Now, you've really centered in your talks anyway, a lot about connection. And you gave a piece of information that really fascinated me, which is that a baby, only 10 to 15% of a baby's brain cell can do what it's supposed to do by itself.
That's right.
So can you just unpack that for us?
So we say newborns come into the world roughly, on average, having about 100 billion neurons. And about 15 to 20% of those neurons are able to do what they are doing and enabling that newborn and infant to do what they're supposed to do. But in order for them to grow and to move from newborn to infant to toddler and so forth, it requires them, and for their mind to expand and flourish, it requires the rest of those neurons, about 80 to 85%, to be fired by having an interaction with another human being. This, of course, might put pressure on parents, but in fact, we're doing this all the time by looking at our child, by speaking with our child, by holding our child. So it's not as if we have to give them a PhD right out of the womb, but it is a matter of our interacting, being attuned to them, and it doesn't mean that we have to be attuned to them all the time, but it really emphasizes how who we are becoming is deeply relational in its fundamental elements. I'm not a person who, in my siloed self, just happens to grow up in a family where they feed me and they're nice to me, and then I go off and get an education, and then I become who I want to become. I'm only ever becoming who I am in relationship with other people, and my capacity for growing into the fullness of who I am called to be, and therefore to do the works that have been prepared for me before the foundation of the world, is to develop as I was made, in God's image, as a social creature, not as an individually siloed one.
I think this message is so timely for the world we live in. And I think of babies who maybe don't have that. You know, you say that every baby is born looking for somebody who is looking for them. If that baby is born and is looking for that person, but no one's looking for them, you know, let's say in an orphanage or an environment that has a lot of neglect, what is the implications of that then for their development?
Well, I think in some respects, it doesn't really take a psychiatrist to help us guess that things are going to be much more difficult. I think it is important to recognize that God has made us as fairly resilient creatures. There's a lot that we do well in spite of a great deal of trauma, a great deal of tragedy. And the other good news is that even for folks who in the early developmental stages of their lives may not receive what is ideal for them, the really beautiful news is that the brain is never beyond the capacity for change.
Wow.
We have had numerous stories told of people who are older in life, who, of course, imagine that because things happened when they were younger, traumatic events that took place when they were in the first 2 decades of life, but now they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s, even 80s, there's nothing I can do about the past because the past has already happened. The really beautiful news about what we're discovering over the last 20 years about the capacity of the brain to change, especially in the context of relationships by whom I'm being deeply known, is that it's never too late. And then we look at the Bible and we think, oh my goodness, Moses was 80 years old when he got the call. He was 40 years old when he went into the desert. God waited for 40 years to get him ready to do this. 80 years old. Abraham, 75 years of age. Nicodemus comes to Jesus, seemingly as an older teacher. These are people that God is confident in working with, in many respects, we would say now, because we've actually seen the organ that God has put between our ears and the capacity that we have for change that really gives us hope that Paul talks about when he says, therefore, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that renewal for Paul, though he would not have known necessarily about how many neurons we have, is not just metaphor for us today. It is an embodied and relational change that's taking place that's a reflection of the gospel.
I love the hope that you're giving there. And I think it's so interesting that you're a psychiatrist. So, obviously you've learned about the problems that we can have with our brain functioning well. And yet you speak with so much hope and life. And I love that. I think that's what the gospel is. You also talk about energy that happens in a room and that really matters. Why does it matter that we understand the way that the energy is happening between us and other people?
Well, again, without our knowing it, we have been, as we like to say, we have been atomized in our world. The dominant narrative in the world that teaches us that human beings are machines and we are individual machines also teaches us that I am the most important, let alone only thing that's happening in the room, even with other people. Now, I might be able to recognize that there are other people here at the party, that there are other people here at the conference table, there are other people here in this conversation. I may recognize that, but I'm not really that aware of the role that this network of human beings together are playing in shaping who I am becoming. I think one of the beautiful things about some of the work that we are doing is that out of this has emerged our awareness of what I would call the mass effect of human relationships. If a person sits with a psychotherapist over a certain amount of time, there will be a certain amount of change that takes place. If that same person sits in a room of community members who are vulnerably doing the same kind of work that that patient is doing collectively, the pace and depth of which that change takes place is much different. Because my capacity for receiving empathy from one person is very different than when I received it from 7 other people at one time. My capacity to have people in my memory when I next have to go do a very difficult thing is very different than when I only have one person. And so this body of Jesus effect that we once again read about in the scriptures is something that we would say Paul is not just using this as metaphor. Paul is using this to highlight that we as a body are making a difference in the world. I'm not expected as an individual to make a difference just by myself, even though I think that's what I'm being asked to do. But I'm being asked to live this life in Jesus collectively as part of this social net that itself is helping to transform who I'm becoming.
And I know when I use the word energy, some people are thinking it's something new age or good vibes or something like that. Can you just break it down a little bit? Like, what do you mean when you say energy?
Well, I quite literally mean energy. Like when we talk about energy that comes off of our power plants and energy that comes from, neuroelectrical feeds, these kinds of things, when we're talking about quantum mechanics here, really. When we are talking with someone in the room, it's not surprising that when I'm with someone that I really enjoy being with, one could later go and watch a video of that interchange, and we could notice how the energy between us, the way we talk to each other, our body language, all those kinds of things might be very different than if I'm talking with someone who's boring me to tears. It's going to just be a very different kind of hangout, as it turns out. But the point being that this energy that we have within us and between us is the world that God has made. We as creatures of the earth are not separate from the earth. We are actually creatures that are communicating with each other. 60 to 90% of all human communication is nonverbal. It doesn't have to do with the words. It doesn't have to do with what my logical, linear thinking brain is comprehending. It has to do with what my voice is saying to your voice, what my ears are hearing, the vocal tone, the eye contact. All of those are gestures. All of those nonverbal cues are sending signals, literally because of the light waves and the sound waves that communicate things to us. And so one of the things that we really focus on when we are inviting people into this transformational process is an invitation for them to consider that others that they are going to encounter today, those others' lives are going to be different because they've encountered the beauty that is emerging from within you. Most of us don't walk out of our front doors thinking, oh my goodness, I wonder whose lives are going to be different and better because I showed up for them today. I'm just trying to get through my freaking day. I'm not imagining these things. But my capacity to imagine that I am the light of the world, as Jesus speaks in Matthew chapter 5, right? I'm a light because I'm a reflection of this, like I am the light of the world. My capacity to imagine that has everything to do with the degree to which I myself feel like I have been loved. And that's where community makes all the difference. It's my encounter with God personally, and also how that is reinforced and strengthened and thickened by virtue of my encounter with others through whom God is also equally loving me.